everyone. Dr. Brian Scott with you. Good to have you with us for this Insight podcast today. We're looking at the end times from a biblical perspective. Where are we in God's timetable? And as we have said over and over and over again, we're getting very, very close towards the very end. We're looking at some of the signs that point to that. With that being the case, we're in 2 Timothy, where Paul wrote Timothy and said to him in chapter 3, verse 1, "Know this, in the last days, in the last days perilous times will come. Exceedingly dangerous times are coming." Paul then begins to describe symptoms of that. There's a lot of those of symptoms here, verses 2, 3, and 4. We're in verse 4, and in verse 4 it says we're going to have traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And then it continues. So as we have been studying, we looked at what did we look at? We looked at what it means to be a traitor, what it means to be a betrayer. And I know that that everybody has had a betrayal in their life. They have found someone they thought was a friend, turns out to be a traitor. And it's not just simply because they leave the friendship, but they leave the friendship or the relationship, and then they do horrible things. They say things about us, they talk about us, they speak evil against us, and on and on and on it goes. And so that's not a very pleasant thing whatsoever. We move from traitors to headstrong, and it's the 16th sign that Paul refers to in these verses. Imagine that, 16 signs, but we're going to find out there's about 24 in total here. So this word headstrong comes from the Greek word heady, and really in terms of its translation, it's a pretty poor translation of the Greek word. Here's what the Greek word says. This is a violent person who's given to reckless emotional intolerance or intemperance. So it really boils down to this. This is someone who is emotionally intolerable. Whoa. They can't control their temper. They go off just instantaneously. Now, how could this ever be the case amongst what we call Christians? Because Paul's writing to Christians. He's writing to Timothy. Timothy pastors the church in Ephesus. We get the book of Ephesians from that work. How can a Christian have an uncontrollable temper? What's the deal? How can that be? But don't you know some? Maybe you are one. I hope not. But think about it. It's not hard to have this come up when you see what people are spending their time doing. They're watching television shows. They're streaming things over the internet. They're playing video games that are mostly driven to conflict, to death. Fantasy games where you're operating in violence. So one of the horrible things that came out of the pandemic from 2020, March of 2020, through to 2023, and still going on, actually, in terms of the response, the attitude, the way people act, is that we were isolated and we weren't allowed to get out and interact with people. So think about what was closed during those times. Schools were closed, universities were closed, colleges were closed, most businesses were closed and went to working from home or Zoom meetings and so on. It was a good time to buy stocks in Zoom, for one thing. If you had the foresight to get into it at the beginning of the pandemic, you could make yourself a bundle of money. But schools were closed, Businesses were closed, stores were closed, only a very few were left open, and some of them were only left open for a portion of the store, and the rest was all blocked off. You had all your theaters and your movies and your aquatic centers and your gyms and your workout centers and fitness centers and churches all closed. We weren't allowed to gather together. We couldn't get together. We had to stay in our homes. So what happened? People turned to the internet. People turned to video games. People turned to online shopping, etc. And so we have ended up with people focusing hours and hours and hours on fantasy games, fantasy shows, fantasy this and that and something else. You know, all these reality shows, there isn't any reality in any of them. So here's the point I'm making. The video game market has exploded. And so as a result, we have indoctrinated our society with murder, death, killing, etc., etc. These are things that have left us with emotional intolerance. We won't put up with anything from anybody. Acts of madness arising. Yes, in early days when Paul was writing, Paul was a master of hurting Christians before he got saved. His name was Saul. He was a Roman citizen, a leader. He took great joy and rejoicing in afflicting Christians, putting them into the arenas to be mauled by animals and so on and so forth. But then things changed. And when they changed, he became the great apostle Paul and wrote most of the New Testament letters. So what happened there? He has personal experience with people with emotional instability, intolerance, harshness. I'll read the definition again. Violent people given to reckless emotional intolerance and intemperance, unable to control their tempers. So we have today in the 21st century the most civilized, sophisticated, technologically advanced, and adept citizens ever, and at the same time we are the most savage and violent people that the earth has ever known. The hottest selling games on the market today, and I'm talking about multi-million-dollar games, feature savage, murder, killing, etc. So the question becomes, is this normal? Or is this a sign of the end? This is a sign of the end. This is heady or headstrong or emotionally unstable people. So why do you think we have mass shootings? Why do you think we have an employee who gets fired who decides he's just going to go back to the place he worked at with some guns or a gun or a machine gun or AK-47 or pistols or whatever, and he's going to take a whole bunch of people out because that's what they have played and watched on TV and games and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. It is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. It's a sign of the very end. It's sign number 16. Well, let's continue here to the next one, which is Haughty. It's number 17 on Paul's list, is in verse number 4. Haughty, or in the King James, is referred to as high-minded. So what's that mean? Well, I'm glad you asked. This is someone who sees himself more important than he really is. He has unbridled pride. In fact, the Greek word for haughtiness, you're going to really get a kick out of this. It's typhoo, T-U-P-H-O-O, tufo. I said it wrong. but it gives us the word in English, typhoon. Now, you are more familiar with a typhoon than tufo, but a typhoon, much like a hurricane, it causes people to race around very, very quickly, to board up their homes, to board up their businesses, to secure everything in their backyard, et cetera, et cetera. And they sandbag their doors, their windows, anything where water could get in. They get prepared for a massive storm that's coming in their direction. And as the storm gets closer and closer, the skies get darker and darker, the winds intensify to near hurricane level. The rain is not only falling vertically, it's falling down horizontally, and everyone's taking shelter. Now, give you a personal illustration of this for just a moment. We owned properties down in southern Florida many, many years ago, and one of the things that caused us to be very, very cautious and very uptight, I should say, I don't like saying that, but really it was the case, was the fact that our properties were in line with many of the hurricanes that came through. And hurricanes and typhoons are very similar in that they are massive storms. And they would, we'd watch the news, and the news would say the storm surge on this side of Florida will be in the 12 to 14 foot stage. Well, that meant our unit, our condo that we owned, was going to be totally inundated in water. There's no way you can protect something that's 12 to 14 feet of water when it's on a ground level setting. So we sold that one. We sold that unit. Why? It was ground level. Yeah, it was great. It was super when everything was great. But we thought we should be up on a second floor, which meant it was built on pilings. And so it was like 10, 12 feet off the ground. Even still, the winds were so strong it would blow windows in. It would cause all kinds of damage, horrendous damage. So we became very accustomed to that. We were down south in Florida when a mini hurricane went through one time. And we were in our condo looking out the window as the rain was coming horizontally in the big, massive palm trees standing 50, 60 feet tall. They went from this vertical position to a horizontal position, almost touching the ground. Not pulled out of the ground, just horizontal to the ground. And then when the winds subsided, they went back up. It was the most amazing thing. So a typhoon, or this haughtiness, this high-mindedness, is this attitude that I know more than you, I'm bigger and better than you, I'm prouder and boasting more than you. And so their behavior becomes destructive. Their behavior becomes extremely destructive, and we want to take shelter from them. We distance ourselves from them. So what's happened? Our society has turned into a typhoon. Our society has turned its back on church and on Christians. We are an endangered species in the world today. Now, there was a huge article in the newspaper the other day about a lawsuit occurring out in one of our provinces here in Canada during the pandemic, where they closed down churches and refused to allow them to get together and hold services. So several Christian churches applied for an exemption or the right to hold services along with masks, distancing, et cetera, et cetera. So they were going to comply with all of these requirements. Everyone was going to wear a mask. Everyone was going to stay 6 feet apart. They would sit in pods, family pods only. They would be 6 feet in each direction from anyone else, etc. The request for this gathering together was ignored completely and not dealt with by the public health officials. But at the same time, several other religious groups applied for the same gathering permission and were granted that permission within 1 day, another group within 3 days, another group within 4 days. But the Christian churches were totally ignored. And so they brought a legal challenge to this, and that legal challenge is still being dealt with several years later as to, hey, we were discriminated against. The law was not, we were not treated fairly. The law was not applied the same across the board. This is wrong. This has got to change. Anyways, the point I'm getting at is this. Societal rules, regulations, government rules, regulations, public health official rules, regulations, all of these things are becoming typhoon-level attacks against the book called the Bible, against our faith called Christianity, etc., etc. Signs of the end. Haughty, high-mindedness. So you find the individual makes decisions that aren't being applied across the board evenly and correctly and fairly because they have a haughty spirit, a high-minded spirit. I'm in charge. Who are you? I'm the boss. I'm the big guy. You're the small guy. And on it goes. So we have endured a typhoon during the pandemic. It blew in on us, and it shut everything down. A lot of the businesses went under. A lot of professional offices are still working from home while the rents are being paid on vacant offices. A lot of friendships were wiped out. A lot of situations were changed. That pandemic, when it came through, it wasn't necessarily the pandemic, the actual virus itself that was, it was a problem, major health problem. I understand that. But what was worse was the government edicts, the health edicts, the rules, the regulations, the standards, and then their application. We had public health authorities when we did open up some of our stores again. They would go into a store as a shopper, and there would be 2 staff members there, and the 6-foot rule was demanded of staff members. They had to stay 6 feet apart from one another. And they would ask a question which would cause one of the staff members to move over to answer the question. The other staff member hadn't moved, so now the person across the counter from them had caused them to violate the 6-foot rule. They moved from being 6 feet apart to being 3 feet apart. The moment they did that, that individual who went into the store would pull out a tape measure, stretch it out and say, you just violated the 6-foot rule, bring out a pad and start writing out a ticket, and serve them with a ticket with a fine of $1,000 for having violated the rule. That's typhoon level. You might think, hey, you're going overboard with this, doctor. Maybe, but think about it. It's a person who is operating with an attitude here that he's more important than everybody else. The common sense is gone. It's out the window. And it was typhoon-like. Now, when you see the word haughty and high-minded, you think of someone who's just a bag of hot air. But folks, I'm telling you, it's more than that. It's what's happened to a lot of people in some level of authority. They became unbelievably haughty, typhoon level. You needed to protect yourself against them. Oh my gracious. So what's going on right now? We're trying to rebuild from that. And it's not an easy task. And it's taken a lot of wind out of the sails. Once again, let me summarize. All of these signs tell us we're in the last days. These signs are occurring around us all the time. We have grown so accustomed to all these signs that we don't even see them as signs of the end anymore. We just keep going along like we always have without any awareness of how deep we're getting into this, and we're on the verge of it. So prepare yourself, get ready. Things are about to really change in the near future. I hope you'll be prepared. See you in the next podcast. Amen.